This is Querétaro in Mexico, and at a glance it looks like just another North American city. But hidden amongst the quiet streets and family homes are some of the largest AI data centers in the world. The region already hosts 10 of them, and 18 more are set to be built within the next few years. On the surface, these buildings look like nothing more than plain concrete shells, but behind the walls lie some of the darkest and most misunderstood consequences of big tech's AI boom. Microsoft's facilities alone draw nearly 50 million cubic meters of water every single year, roughly a third of the entire city's water use. Big tech knows how devastating this is, but even with countless NDAs and glossy PR videos, the real impact is impossible to fully conceal. People on the outskirts of the city are now being forced to travel for hours in search of usable water sources, and even if you don't live near one, you're already feeling the impact of data centers. By 2027, they're expected to consume more electricity than the entire nation of Japan, yet governments keep backing them as if big tech and AI are the only path toward human progress. Billions of dollars of taxpayer money are flowing into these projects every year, but every new facility doesn't spread the gains. Instead, it concentrates them. The companies already ahead become almost impossible to catch. By the end of the decade, over 2,000 new facilities are expected to come online, nearly tripling global capacity, all owned by a few companies. More money is being invested into these new centres than in building new power plants, airports, and oil refineries combined, and governments all around the world are rushing to become the new AI superpower. But in their desperation, they may be setting us up for a cost we don't yet understand, not just in energy, but who ends up controlling the infrastructure of the digital world. You've probably heard of large language models. This is what most people mean when they talk about AI, but what you may be less familiar with is what it actually takes to run one of these. Every time an LLM generates text, it's performing trillions of probability calculations to guess the next word in a sentence, and the only ways to make these models smarter is to do even more of these calculations, which requires staggering amounts of computational power. This doesn't just exist in the cloud, but instead lives in vast data centers, which aren't some giant library of stored information, but a warehouse of chips, servers, and cooling systems built to do one thing: compute. You may already know this, but the current AI hype has turned into a bit of an arms race, with pretty much every major tech company from America to China spending billions trying to make sure their LLMs and systems are the best. Looking through the list, it's littered with tech giants, committing hundreds of billions of dollars to build these inconspicuous looking warehouses. But behind the four walls of one of these data centers is a different story, and it all starts here. Chances are, if you're watching this video, you've probably already used ChatGPT or another LLM, and when you do, even a basic search, although it doesn't seem like a lot, a simple message will use around 10 times more electricity than doing the same on Google. For context, about 2.5 billion searches are done on chatbots every day, and that's just one LLM owned by one AI company. Spinning this out at a wider scale, a single data center can consume more than 430,000 megawatt hours of electricity every single year, which is roughly the same power needed to keep 40,000 homes running for the same period. Globally, data centers are already consuming more energy than all the people in Sweden combined, and by 2030, demand for these centers is set to double. At that point, they would be consuming nearly 5% of the global electricity supply. But here's the catch: most power grids around the world weren't built for that. And if they're anything like the ones in America, then they're already operating near full capacity. Most people think of electricity coming from the grid like it's one giant national system. But in reality, the US is more like a patchwork. 3 huge networks, each broken into smaller regional operators. Local utilities generate and distribute power, but all of them are constantly balancing supply and demand. It's basically a zero-sum game, and what one player takes is power that someone else can't, which is exactly why it's the local level where these data centers cause the most pain. These massive facilities tend to be built near rural towns, where land and electricity are cheap, and that makes sense for companies, but not for the communities around them. A grid is designed to serve a few thousand homes, suddenly has to feed a giant warehouse of servers. Take the town of The Dalles in Oregon. Before 2006, it was like any other rural town, but that all changed when Google built its massive Taylor Lake data center, one of the largest in the world at the time. In the years that followed, the facility was revealed to be consuming over a quarter of the city's entire energy supply. But these companies don't just use an outsized share of the power, they've learned how to play the rules of the game itself. When you get given your electricity bill, the price that you see isn't just for the power you use. A big chunk of it goes toward keeping enough capacity ready for moments when demand peaks, like when everyone gets home from work and flips on the lights. Think of it like an insurance policy. You're paying to make sure the grid can handle the worst case scenario. But if you know the rules, you can play around them. Data centers run 24/7, which means they don't have to draw power at the same time as households. And with the help of prediction algorithms, they shift their usage away from those peak hours. On paper, they look efficient, but in reality, they're just dodging premiums. And in a zero-sum game like the grid, those costs don't just vanish. They're simply pushed onto everyone else, which means households, the one group least able to move their usage, end up footing the bill. Smaller consumers tend to be stuck on flat rates, which means they can't dodge the spikes in grid costs the way that a giant corporation can. And for various local communities, this effect has been crippling. In places like Oregon, electricity bills have climbed up to 50% over the past few years, with studies suggesting that up to 70% of that increase is due to new data centers. To put that into perspective, a single one of these facilities puts the same pressure on a grid as building around 35,000 new homes overnight. That kind of demand, all concentrated in just a few warehouse-sized rooms, is not normal, and it creates some serious problems. Because there is so much energy flowing around a couple of warehouses, the servers end up generating extreme amounts of heat, and the only way to keep these servers from frying is to run industrial-sized cooling systems. It's an effective way for keeping systems cool, but it burns through enormous amounts of water. If we take a look at Microsoft's proposed data center near Phoenix, one facility alone was expected to consume 56 million gallons of water a year, the same amount as 50,000 households. And because these centers are rarely built in big cities with robust infrastructure, they end up in smaller, drought-prone communities, which means a single warehouse of servers can swallow up a quarter of a region's water supply, leaving farms and families on the edge of collapse. If we look at our example from earlier, Querétaro, Mexico, for months now, the streets outside government buildings have been filled with protesters, as massive new pipelines are being built to carry millions of cubic meters of water out to cool the incoming data centers. And over the past few years, the national government has spent about $100 million subsidizing the building of these new facilities. The only problem is that the water meant for these centers was already meant for the people living in the town. They'll be using the exact same water supply that people have been relying upon for decades, crippling local farms, households, and entire indigenous communities who are already struggling to access enough to survive. This isn't unique to Mexico. Across the world, billions in taxpayer money is being spent trying to attract the likes of Microsoft, Google, and OpenAI. Regions are effectively locked into a race to the bottom. Not wanting to miss out on the AI revolution, they are offering bigger and bigger tax breaks, all in the hope of attracting new investment. Now, in theory, this kind of investment should be a good thing. More spending means new jobs, higher wages, and typically faster economic growth. But the reality is quite different. Once a data center is built, it only needs a few dozen permanent workers for it to be able to operate full-time. Instead, communities give up water, power, and tax revenue in exchange for promises that never fully materialize. And the economics don't even add up either. In most industries, companies only build new factories when demand is strong enough to pay for them. But with data centers, that mechanism is completely broken. These facilities are being built on the assumption that explosive demand will arrive at some point in the future, even though today's revenue streams don't come anywhere near close to justifying the costs. A single one of these data centers can cost upwards of $50 billion to build. For context, OpenAI, the flagship AI company, only brought in $12 billion in revenue last year. This is really fueled by a kind of gold rush logic, where the fear of missing out outweighs normal market disciplines. Firms are terrified of falling behind their rivals, so they keep building no matter the price. And in that scramble, very little attention is being given to the very real human costs these data centers leave behind. So where does this all add up to? Right now, AI is being sold as the next great technological revolution. The narrative is that if we just keep building, keep investing, and keep pushing ahead, the rewards will eventually outweigh the costs. But we are already seeing that these costs are quickly beginning to materialize. Local communities are losing access to their own water supplies, electricity grids are being pushed beyond where they were designed to handle, and taxpayers are subsidizing projects that rarely deliver any real benefits. If AI continues to improve and find real widespread uses, perhaps some of these sacrifices will seem worthwhile. But if the technology stalls, or if the benefits are captured by only a handful of companies, then it's hard to see what the real point in all this spending is.